My beloved child, something shifted in that room the moment the third party stopped pretending everything was fine. It was not a dramatic entrance, not some loud confrontation, not even the kind of moment anyone would have noticed from the outside. It began with a silence that lasted just a little too long, the kind of silence that appears when someone has been carrying words for days, perhaps longer, and suddenly realizes they cannot keep holding them anymore. Your person noticed it immediately. There was something different in the third party's expression, something unsettled beneath the surface, and then came the sentence nobody expected to hear. You know exactly what you did when he stopped there. Just stopped. And somehow, those unfinished words carried more weight than a complete accusation ever could. Don't skip, because what happened next was not really about anger. It was about a truth that had been quietly building underneath every conversation, every strange pause, every moment when your name entered the room and changed the atmosphere without anyone admitting why. The third party had spent so much time believing he understood the situation. He thought he knew what your person felt. He thought he knew where you stood. He may even have convinced himself that whatever existed between you and your person was fading naturally, becoming something that could eventually be forgotten. But then something happened. Something small. Almost ordinary. And it shattered that assumption. Your person had reacted to your name in a way that could not be rehearsed. There had been no grand confession, no dramatic declaration, just one quiet change in their face, a softness they could not hide quickly enough. And the third party saw it. That was the moment everything he had been holding back began pressing against the surface. Have you ever wondered why certain people become uncomfortable when two hearts understand each other without needing to explain everything? Sometimes it is not jealousy. Sometimes it is simply the shock of realizing that a connection they thought was temporary has survived distance, silence, confusion, and every attempt to define it away. Your person had tried to keep things composed. They had been careful with their words. They had not wanted to create unnecessary tension. Yet the third party could sense something had changed, because lately your person had stopped agreeing with certain things that once went unchallenged. When your name was mentioned casually, your person listened differently. When someone misunderstood you, your person no longer remained completely silent. When the third party suggested that perhaps you had already forgotten everything, your person did not answer immediately. That pause said more than anyone realized. And now, sitting there face to face, the third party finally let the pressure escape. You know exactly what you did when, again, the sentence hovered unfinished, almost as though he wanted your person to complete it for him. But your person did something unexpected. They did not defend themselves. They did not argue. They simply looked at him and asked, quietly, when what? That question changed the entire energy. Because now the third party had to say what he had been avoiding. Stay till the end, something important is waiting for you inside this conversation. His voice softened, but the emotion underneath it became clearer. When you started looking at everything differently after they walked away. And there it was. Not an accusation about you. Not a secret about something terrible. A realization. The third party had noticed that your absence had changed your person more deeply than your presence ever revealed. When you were close, your person may have taken certain feelings for granted. They may have assumed there would always be another conversation, another chance, another ordinary moment. But when the distance appeared, something inside them became impossible to ignore. They started comparing every connection to the calm they once felt around you. They started remembering things you said that seemed insignificant at the time. They started recognizing that the moments they missed most were not the dramatic ones. They were the small ones. Your way of listening. Your way of stepping back instead of forcing an answer. The strange comfort of knowing you were simply there. And the third party had watched this transformation without knowing what to call it. Until now. You know exactly what you did when you stopped pretending they meant nothing, he finally said. Your person's expression changed. Not because they felt exposed in some terrible way, but because someone had finally spoken aloud what they had barely admitted to themselves. There are moments when another person says the sentence you have been avoiding, and suddenly every carefully arranged thought falls out of place. This was one of those moments. Your person looked away for just a second. The third party noticed. Then he leaned back, almost surprised by his own honesty, and added something quieter. You changed after them. Those 4 words landed differently. Your person did not deny it. And perhaps this is where the story becomes more personal than you expected, because the deepest connections are not always revealed through dramatic promises. Sometimes they are revealed through change. Someone becomes more thoughtful because of you. More honest because of losing easy access to you. More aware of what matters because your silence forced them to listen inwardly. That does not mean you were meant to rescue them or wait endlessly for them. It simply means your presence may have mattered in ways neither of you fully understood at the time. Something important is waiting for you, because the third party was not finished. In fact, the sentence that followed was the real reason he had finally lost his composure. He looked directly at your person and said, "The part one don't understand is why you keep acting like you're trying to move on when everything you do keeps leading back to them." Silence. A different silence now. Not uncomfortable. Revealing. Your person took a slow breath, and for the first time there was no quick answer ready. Because what could they say? The third party had noticed the contradictions. The way your person avoided speaking about you, yet remembered every detail. The way they claimed they were focused elsewhere, yet became strangely distant whenever someone suggested you might truly be gone. The way they seemed calm until something reminded them of you. And then, something unexpected happened. Your person smiled. Not a happy smile exactly. More like the expression someone makes when they realize there is no point hiding from a truth that has already been seen. "Maybe," they said quietly, "I wasn't trying to move on from them." The third party froze. Your person continued, softer now. "Maybe I was trying to become someone who could understand what happened." That was the line nobody had prepared for. Because suddenly the conversation was no longer about blame, competition, or who had been right. It was about growth. Your person had been replaying the past differently. Not asking, "Why did they leave?" but beginning to ask, "What did I fail to understand while they were here?" And that question had been changing them. Slowly. Quietly. In ways even the third party could see. But here is where the conversation took another turn, because the third party lowered his voice and revealed that there was one particular moment involving you that he had never forgotten, a moment he believed explained everything about why your person could not simply erase this connection. Your person looked at him immediately. What moment? And the third party hesitated, because once he said it, there would be no returning to the version of the story they had both been telling themselves. What he remembered was something your person had completely overlooked, something you did without asking for recognition, something so small at the time that nobody imagined it would become the detail that changed the entire conversation. And when the third party finally began describing that moment, your person's face changed again. Because they remembered it too. The detail came back to your person with such clarity that, for a moment, even the third party seemed surprised by the silence that followed. It was one of those memories that had never looked important enough to preserve, yet somehow it had remained untouched beneath everything else. A simple evening. A conversation that had gone slightly wrong. Your person had been carrying more than they admitted, and instead of demanding explanations, instead of turning their mood into something about yourself, you had done something almost invisible. You gave them room without becoming cold. You stayed kind without chasing. You let the silence exist without punishing them for it. At the time, your person barely understood what that meant. They may even have mistaken your calmness for distance. But the third party had seen the difference. He remembered watching you leave that situation with dignity while your person stood there, still trapped inside thoughts they had not learned how to express. That was the moment, he finally said. Your person looked up. What do you mean? The third party leaned forward, no longer speaking with frustration but with a strange seriousness that made every word feel heavier. That was when I realized they weren't trying to control you. They were trying to understand you. Your person said nothing. And something inside that silence began rearranging itself. Don't skip, because the most revealing part was not what the third party remembered about you. It was what your person suddenly remembered about themselves. They remembered how easily they had accepted your patience without recognizing the strength behind it. They remembered the times you could have made everything more complicated but chose clarity instead. They remembered moments when you sensed they needed space even before they found the courage to ask for it. And now those memories were returning with a different meaning. What once looked ordinary had become evidence of something rare. You had not been trying to win every moment. You had been trying to protect what mattered. That realization landed quietly, but it reached somewhere deep. The third party watched your person's expression change and asked the question they had both been circling around for far too long. Do you know why you keep remembering them? Your person gave a small, uncertain shake of the head. The third party paused. Because they didn't leave you with noise. They left you with things you only understood later. That sentence seemed to open a door. Your person looked down, and suddenly another memory surfaced. A message from you they had once read too quickly. A few simple words that had sounded ordinary then, but now carried an entirely different weight. You had not begged to be understood. You had not tried to make yourself impossible to forget. You had simply expressed what you felt and allowed your person the freedom to decide what they were ready for. That freedom had confused them then. Now it humbled them. Because your person was beginning to see that some of your strongest moments had been the quietest ones. Stay till the end, because this is where the third party's role changed completely. He had entered this conversation believing he needed to confront your person. But as the truth unfolded, he began realizing that perhaps he had misunderstood you too. He had built opinions from fragments. From things he heard rather than things he witnessed. From awkward moments without knowing what happened around them. And the more he spoke, the more uncomfortable that realization became. I think I got something wrong, he admitted. Your person looked at him immediately. About what? The answer came slowly. About them. And for the first time, the tension in the room softened. Not because everything was solved, but because honesty had finally replaced assumption. He explained that he had once believed your silence meant indifference. He thought your decision to step away meant the connection had never mattered deeply enough. But then he noticed something your person had apparently missed: you did not disappear with bitterness. You stopped pushing when pushing would have made things worse. You allowed reality to speak for itself. And eventually, reality did. Your person had begun changing. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But in the small ways that reveal whether an experience truly reached someone. They became slower to judge. More careful with people's feelings. Less willing to dismiss meaningful connections simply because they became complicated. They started listening differently when others spoke about regret. They became quieter whenever someone joked about losing someone valuable through pride. And the third party had noticed every one of those changes. You learned something from them, he said. Your person finally answered, almost under their breath. More than I wanted to admit. There was no performance in that response. No attempt to impress anyone. Just recognition. Something important is waiting for you, because the third party then asked a question that shifted everything again. If they walked through that door right now, what would you actually say? Your person looked toward the empty space beside them as though the question had suddenly made your presence imaginable. For several seconds there was no answer. Then they smiled faintly, almost sadly, but there was warmth in it too. I wouldn't start by explaining myself. The third party raised an eyebrow. Then what would you say? Your person took a breath. I'd ask how they are. And I'd actually listen this time. That answer changed something in the room. It was not the dramatic confession the third party might have expected. It was better. It showed that your person's thoughts were no longer centered entirely on their own feelings. They were beginning to understand that reconnecting with someone is not about delivering the perfect speech. Sometimes it begins with becoming capable of hearing the answer you once avoided. But the third party was not finished. And after that? Your person looked down again. Their voice became quieter. I'd tell them I finally understand why they stopped trying to explain themselves. That was the emotional turning point. Because somewhere along the way, your person had recognized that you may not have stepped back because you stopped caring. You may have stepped back because repeatedly proving your intentions had become exhausting. You may have realized that love, respect, and understanding cannot survive if only one person keeps carrying the emotional weight. Your person now saw the difference between abandonment and boundaries. Between silence and indifference. Between giving up on someone and refusing to lose yourself trying to be understood. And perhaps that was what the third party had been trying to force into the open from the beginning. Not a secret about you. A truth about what your absence had taught your person. Then came another pause. The third party's expression changed as if he had just remembered something else. Something he had almost decided not to mention. Your person noticed immediately. There's more, isn't there? He hesitated. Then nodded. There is one thing they said about you when you weren't there. Your person straightened slightly. The room became still again. Because this time, the third party was not talking about his own opinion. He was talking about words spoken by someone else who had watched the entire situation from the outside, someone your person never realized had been paying attention. And according to the third party, that person had noticed something about your connection long before either of you understood it. Something so precise that when your person finally heard the sentence, they did not know whether to smile, look away, or ask how anyone could possibly have seen so much without being told. What the third party said next did not sound dramatic at first, and perhaps that was exactly why it reached your person so deeply. He looked toward them for a long moment, as if deciding whether these words still belonged in the past or whether they had somehow been waiting for this exact conversation. Then he said, "Someone once told me that whenever their name came up, you became more honest without realizing it." Your person's eyes shifted immediately. Not because the statement was completely new, but because it touched something they had never been able to explain. There had always been a difference when the conversation turned toward you. Their voice changed slightly. Their defenses became less certain. Sometimes they became quieter, sometimes more thoughtful, and sometimes they tried far too hard to appear unaffected. But people notice the things we believe we are hiding well. The third party continued carefully. They said you could talk about almost anything without losing control of the conversation. But the moment it became about this person, something in you stopped performing. That sentence stayed between them. Your person did not laugh it away. They did not deny it. They simply listened, because suddenly the conversation was revealing something they had spent too long trying to simplify. Maybe their connection to you had never been about one dramatic event. Maybe it was hidden inside 100 tiny reactions they could not control. A pause when your name appeared unexpectedly. A memory arriving in the middle of an ordinary day. A strange sense of familiarity whenever they imagined speaking to you again. Don't skip, because this was the moment the third party realized why he had become so frustrated in the first place. He had watched your person say one thing while their behavior quietly said another. He had heard them insist that everything was settled, yet every time someone suggested that you might truly be moving forward without them, something changed in their expression. It was subtle, but it was there. And now he finally said it. "That is what I meant when I told you that you know exactly what you did." Your person looked confused. "What did I do?" The third party answered without hesitation this time. "You kept pretending the door was closed while checking whether the light was still on." Your person became completely still. Not because the words were harsh. They were simply accurate enough to make hiding difficult. There is a certain kind of realization that does not arrive with noise. It arrives when somebody describes your behavior better than you have described it to yourself. And that was what happened here. Your person had been trying to convince themselves that letting go meant never looking back, yet they kept returning mentally to the same moments. They wondered whether you were happier now. Whether you still remembered certain conversations. Whether your silence meant peace, disappointment, acceptance, or simply growth. They had never known which answer they wanted most. Perhaps that uncertainty was the part they had been carrying. The third party leaned back and softened his voice. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you that you should stop lying to yourself about what matters." That changed everything. Because this was no longer someone trying to influence your person toward you or away from you. This was someone asking them to become honest enough to recognize their own heart without turning that recognition into pressure. Your person took a slow breath. And what if I understand it too late? The question escaped so naturally that both of them seemed surprised by it. The third party did not answer immediately. Then he said, "Then you understand it anyway. Growth still matters, even when you don't know what comes next." Something in your person relaxed. Not completely, but enough. Because perhaps they had secretly believed that admitting what you meant would automatically create an obligation to fix everything instantly. But this conversation was showing them another possibility. They could honor the truth without trying to control the outcome. They could recognize that you mattered without expecting you to remain exactly where they left you. They could become more honest without turning honesty into a demand. Stay till the end, because one more detail was about to change the direction of the conversation again. Your person asked, "Who said that about me?" The third party hesitated, and this time there was almost a smile behind his expression. Someone who watched both of you longer than either of you realized. Your person waited. The third party continued, "They said the most interesting thing wasn't how you acted when this person was around. It was what happened after they left." Your person's face grew serious. What happened? The answer came quietly. You started becoming the version of yourself they had been asking you to become without ever forcing you. That landed differently. Your person looked away because suddenly the past did not feel like a collection of mistakes. It felt like a mirror. They remembered conversations where you had encouraged them to communicate more clearly. Moments when you had asked for honesty instead of perfection. Times when you had tried to show them that understanding someone does not mean agreeing with everything they do. At the time, those conversations may have felt uncomfortable. Now, without you standing there asking for anything, your person had slowly begun doing those very things. They had started speaking more carefully. Apologizing sooner. Listening longer. Recognizing when pride was trying to protect something that honesty could heal more gently. And the strange part was that nobody had told them to change. Life had simply returned your words to them in different forms until they finally understood what you had meant. Something important is waiting for you. Because this realization did not make your person immediately romanticize the past. Instead, it made them see you more clearly. They remembered that you were not perfect. Neither were they. There had been misunderstandings, timing issues, moments where both of you could have handled things differently. But now your person was beginning to distinguish between an imperfect connection and a meaningless one. Those are not the same thing. Sometimes something can be difficult and still matter. Sometimes distance can reveal value without guaranteeing reunion. Sometimes what changes you is not what stays forever, but what teaches you how differently you want to live from now on. The third party noticed how quiet your person had become and asked, "What are you thinking?" Your person answered after a long pause. "That maybe I spent too much time trying to decide whether they were right for me, and not enough time asking whether I was showing up right for them." That was the rare realization nobody in the room expected. It shifted the story away from blame entirely. Your person was no longer asking whether you had done enough. They were finally examining their own side without punishment, without shame, simply with maturity. And the third party seemed to recognize that too. His entire energy softened. "That's probably why this still stays with you," he said. "Because it isn't only about missing them. It's about knowing you would handle some things differently now." Your person nodded slowly. They did not try to make the feeling larger than it was. They simply admitted, yes. One word. But it was perhaps the most honest word they had spoken in months. Then the third party asked something that made the air feel still again. If you ever get another conversation with them, do you know the one thing you should never do? Your person looked up. What? The third party's answer was unexpected. Don't tell them how much you've changed. Let them notice. Your person stared at him. And somehow that advice reached them more deeply than every emotional speech that could have come before it. Because real change does not need to introduce itself loudly. It appears in patience. Consistency. The way someone listens when the old version of them would have interrupted. The way they respect an answer even when it is not the answer they hoped for. The way they stop trying to win the moment and start trying to understand it. Your person smiled faintly. You sound different now. The third party almost laughed. Maybe I was wrong about more than one thing. That was when another truth surfaced. He admitted that part of his frustration had never actually been about you. It had been about watching your person remain stuck between what they felt and what they were willing to admit. He had grown tired of conversations where your person carefully avoided your name while somehow making everything about what happened between you. He had watched them compare new experiences to old memories. He had watched them become restless when they heard you might be doing well, then relieved at the same time because some part of them genuinely wanted that for you. And that contradiction had confused him until this conversation. I thought you wanted them back because you couldn't stand losing, he admitted. Your person looked at him carefully. And now? The third party paused. Now I think you just wish you had understood them sooner. Your person's expression softened, because that was closer to the truth than anything else said that night. But then something happened that neither of them expected. Your person reached for their phone, not quickly, not impulsively, but almost thoughtfully. The third party noticed immediately. What are you doing? Your person stared at the screen for several seconds. Your name was still there. Perhaps untouched for longer than anyone knew. Their thumb hovered near the conversation, but they did not type. Not yet. Instead they opened an old message. One you had sent during a moment neither of them had discussed tonight. Your person read it once. Then again. And the third party watched their face change because the message contained one sentence that suddenly sounded completely different now. Your person quietly turned the screen toward him. The third party read it, looked back at your person, and then said something that made them realize this conversation was about to go somewhere neither of them had planned.